Well, howdy. Welcome to MissionViewfinder. Today, we've got a relevant topic for missionaries and one to be aware of if that's where you're headed. And that is the discouragements that we can face as missionaries working in God's mission field.
When my family first came to Thailand, I had this idea in the back of my head that I was going to do great things, like I was going to be so useful here in Thailand, it was going to be great. Well, that was actually a pretty good setup for some pretty discouraging and difficult times, because shortly after we got here, I was asked to teach English, and originally I'd been like, yeah, it's not something I'm really interested in doing. And when I was asked, I still wasn't like, yes, like I can do this, I know what I'm doing. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I still had this idea that I can do great things. And so I went into those first 3 months of teaching, and it was horrible. Like, it was bad. It was so hard. I did not know what I was doing. It seemed like the kids weren't really learning stuff. I was teaching stuff that was way too easy, or else it was way too complicated, and I didn't know what to do. What ended up happening was at the middle of every day, which was after my 4 classes, because I taught for like 3 solid hours and then it was lunch break, I would come home at lunchtime and I would go outside and pray, because I felt so desperate for help, so desperate to get out. But through the course of things, like I said, I prayed so much, I prayed so hard, I cried, I just cried out to God, like, help me, send someone, please. Well, God didn't send anybody. But at the end of those first 3 months, we had a break, and during that break, God really helped me to establish a better relationship with Him so that He could do the teaching through me. The interesting thing was, though, at the end of that break, I realized that I had felt closer to God during those 3 months than I did after. Like, those 3 months were so hard, and yet that was when I actually felt closest to God. Like, it just hit me. It's like, these really hard times, yeah, they're hard, but they drive us to pray probably like we never would otherwise, and that means that we get closer to God than we would otherwise. They're actually a blessing in disguise.
I think it's important to remember that discouragement does not bring glory to God. And a lot of times when we are discouraged, we're looking at the things that we see from a human perspective and not as God sees. When Jesus was here on earth and He was crucified and He died, the disciples were extremely discouraged, right? Their Messiah was now dead. And I think that that's really interesting because Jesus had told them multiple times, I'm going to die and I'm going to rise on the 3rd day. They should have known, right? But Jesus and His mission as Messiah did not fit in to what their idea was of the Messiah. They were thinking in a very temporal context of, they're gonna, the Messiah's gonna come and free us from the Romans. But Jesus didn't come to free them from the Romans. He came to free them from sin. And in order to do that, He had to die on the cross. So for the disciples, they saw complete and total disaster, when in reality, that disaster that they saw was the very means of accomplishing the work that Jesus had come to do, and their salvation. They didn't get that, though, at the time, because it didn't fit in with their preconceived ideas.
For something like really practical, though, maybe I should take these off my head. Yeah. For something a little bit more practical when it comes to dealing with really hard times like that, I shared in a previous vlog, and we can link to it also in this vlog. But something that helped me a lot in the past and still helps me today is praising God. There is nothing that I have found to be more helpful than either taking the time to sit down and write down things that I'm thanking God for or praising Him for, either praising Him for who He is or thanking Him for things He's given me. It doesn't matter. Just expressing that gratitude and that praise, it changes our hearts, it changes our minds, and it allows God to come in, and the devil doesn't like it. So yeah, that is the absolute most helpful practical tip that I can give anyone when it comes to dealing with difficult times.
You know, I think discouragement is kind of the outward evidence that there's somewhere deep in our hearts a distrust of God. Because if we think of it as God is all powerful, He's over everything, He's called us to this work, and you know, it's like being discouraged that we're not seeing the fruit is almost like distrusting Him and that He's capable and in control, that He's doing what He's promised He's going to do. So yeah, I think that it's something that the best way to deal with it is to focus on the opposite of it, not focus on the discouragement and how I don't want to be discouraged, but just lift up God in thoughts, in prayers, in praise, and singing and everything, just to kind of infuse us with the opposite of discouragement, with the opposite of distrust, and just recounting, you know, all the ways that God led us up to this point.
I've had some pretty discouraging stuff when it comes to video editing too. Like, I remember one time, like, we did an interview and we had both cameras, so I was on one angle, Jonathan was on the other. And it wasn't until we got home and like we're editing it that I realized that my shot was like blown out, like way too bright. Sometimes I just felt kind of like throwing in the towel. It's like, Lord, like it's just so bad. Like I feel so bad about it and I can't seem to fix it. You know, something that God has been helping me to understand is that when God shows me something that's wrong, something that I'm not doing well in, it's not to say, see, you're such a bad person, this is really bad. It's to say, I want to change your failure into success, your defeat into victory. And when I think of it that way, it's like, okay, Lord, I just give it to you because I can't do it. And you know, as we give our problems to God, as we give our mistakes to God, it's really, honestly, it can be harder to deal with our own mistakes than with things that other people have done that could have been discouraging. But when we give our mistakes to God and then claim His promises, claim that all things will work together for good to those that love God, claim His promises that He will give us a new heart, that He will change our ways, then we don't need to be discouraged. We don't need to get depressed because God has promised and His promises are sure.
So if you feel like your mission field or your life that you've given to God is looking like a disaster, take courage, because God sometimes needs things to look like a disaster to us in our human eyes so that we can learn to realize that disaster in human eyes might be victory in God's eyes. He can bring it all together even when it looks like disaster to us.